Okay, figured that out. Let's see. Oh, good. Now you can hear me. I accidentally bumped my my microphone. Sorry. Let's try that again. Hello, my name is Sandy Roberts, and I'm the Makerspace Coordinator for the Warren County Library System. And you have found Friday S.T.E.A.M. Every week at 3 p.m. on Fridays, we bring you science, technology, engineering, art, and math, put it all together, mix it all up, and learn something new. So last week and this week, in honor of Halloween, you can see my pumpkins are going over here, we are doing some candy chemistry. So last week we learned all about the science of sugar, and this week we're going to learn about chocolate, which is one of the most popular treats in the United States, with good reason. So let's see if we can learn a little bit about this amazing treat. Today I'm going to stick a little more with the biology since we were a little heavier on the chemistry last week. So we're going to learn about the biology, we're going to learn about the history of chocolate, and we're going to learn about how chocolate is actually made. How does it get to our stores in time for Halloween and other holidays? So I'm just going to keep an eye over here because I do have stuff cooking once again. But let's jump into our presentation and learn a little bit. I have a lot of information for you today. Okay, switching over. Oop. So here we go. Start at the very beginning. So let's start with, where is chocolate grown? Where does cocoa come from? Well, chocolate actually comes from the cacao fruit, specifically the bean in that fruit that's found in Central and South American rainforests. And then there are actually some other, it originated in Central and South America, but now it's grown in other places. So now it's grown in areas of Africa, as you can see, in areas of South America, and in the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, the South Pacific Islands, places like the Philippines, New Guinea, Samoa. And there are actually three popular types, the most common types of cacao grown. Forastero, which is this, if I can remember correctly, Forastero is the green. The Criollo is here. That's kind of this blue area here. That was kind of one of the very earliest beans. And then the red is the Trinitario, okay? And you may recognize that root as Trinidad, okay? A Caribbean city. So these are the three most popular types, and most chocolates are made from one or a combination of these beans. All right, so where does chocolate come from? As I said, it's originated in Central and South America. So anthropologists have found evidence of chocolate that was produced by cultures living in present-day Mexico as far back as 1900 BC. Okay, so that's more than 4,000 years ago. So cacao and chocolate have been around for a really long time. Ancient Mesoamericans, they would ferment, roast, and grind the cacao beans. We're going to talk more about how that's done. And then they would add things like water or vanilla bean or honey or often chili peppers and make it into a frothy drink like you see here. So it wasn't until just recently that we started eating chocolate as like a solid treat. It was instead more of a bitter or spicy beverage for most of its history. So, Olmec, Mayan, Aztec civilizations. And here you can see where they're typically found. These are Mayan. This is your Olmec. And you've got your Aztecs here, okay? So these are our Mesoamerican people. And they found chocolate, and they found that it was a mood enhancer, which is true. We know now the science behind the fact that it actually does increase serotonin and dopamine in our brains. And it was also very invigorating, which again is true. It does contain some caffeine, especially when you're putting it with honey and sugar. It's going to give you a bit of a rush. So they believed it to be a mystical or spiritual product, from the gods. So they reserved it pretty much for rulers, priests, nobles. It was used in ceremonies and sacred ceremonies. When the Aztecs started to dominate Mesoamerica in the 14th century, they really wanted the cacao beans, but they couldn't grow them in their area, okay, of central Mexico, which meant that they started trading with the Mayans, okay, for cacao beans. And in this way, they were actually used as a form of currency, a very early form of currency in early trade. They were that valuable and that highly prized. In the 1500s, Spanish conquistadors came along, like Hernan Cortez. They were looking for gold and silver, but they discovered this bitter drink. And since they also had cane sugar found in places like the Caribbean, they very soon were able to combine that with cinnamon and other spices from their trade, and basically create a new, more palatable luxury chocolate drink. But it was still very much for wealthy people. So the Spanish brought that chocolate back to Europe. And in Europe, the daughter of King Philip III, okay, who would have been familiar with chocolate coming from the Americas, married a French king, Louis the Eighth, 1615, and she brought chocolate to France. Well, she was a very popular person. She had lots of fancy parties. It quickly became all the rage among all the European courts. And European powers started establishing plantations, okay, and colonizing regions where cacao could be grown and where sugar could be grown, because they became very expensive commodity crops and are some of our earliest commodity crops. So chocolate, we have to always remember, as delightful as it is, it does come with a history of colonization and mistreatment, to be completely honest, of the people that were living there and growing this crop. So that's not a good thing, but we're going to talk more about how that is shifting again, finally. It keeps wanting to go back to that slide. Anyway, in 1828, now 200 years of only the very wealthy elite getting to sip their chocolate beverage. And it was very fashionable for French ladies and English ladies to have hot cocoa for breakfast, whereas we might have coffee or tea. So it was very fashionable. It was a sign of wealth. Well, in 1828, a Dutch chemist, Van Houten, invented the cocoa press. And when we talk about how much work goes into making cocoa, you'll understand this was a huge revolution. We could take a machine now and make chocolate making faster, easier, and cheaper. As a result, you know what happened? It was chocolate for the masses. The modern era of chocolate came in, and now it could be used as a confectionery for just about anybody. And it made it affordable. And this is really where things changed for chocolate. Because by 1847, a British company called J.S. Fry & Sons created the very first solid edible chocolate bar. And they used cocoa butter, we'll talk about that, cocoa powder, and sugar. And it was incredibly popular. It was shelf stable. You didn't have to mix it up right now. You could, take it home for later, which was a big plus. It was affordable, and it very quickly became very popular among the British. And once the British liked something, well, it spread throughout Europe. Rudolf Lindt, you may actually recognize that name, Lindt. Yeah, that's a famous brand of chocolate. It's still around. 1879, he produced the first milk chocolates, where he really blended in cream and milks and made these smooth, very, very tasty chocolates. They weren't bitter. They were truly confections. And they remain exactly that today. Very famous company producing very nice gourmet chocolates. Very, very soon, companies like Cadbury, Mars, Hershey's, all came in and really fostered a chocolate boom in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. So we've had 150 years of chocolate for the masses, and look at all we've done with that chocolate in that time. Living here in Blairstown in western New Jersey in Warren County, excuse me, we are very familiar with Mars and M&M. They're a very big force out here. So, I think a lot of us have gone to the plant, have gone to those events. I live not too far from Hershey, Pennsylvania. Again, a huge industry for those areas. So chocolate has really become an important, not just treat, but industry. And a lot of people work in it. And obviously we have a ton of different types of chocolate now. Okay, so that's the history. Let's look at how it's actually grown. Where does this stuff really come from? Well, most cacao beans still come from small, independent cacao farms in tropical regions, primarily right now in Africa and Indonesia, which have really kind of taken over the chocolate trade. And what's really special is that a lot of people are trying to foster these smaller farms again, and these independent farms to put production back into the hands of indigenous people who started it all, 4,000 years ago. So on these little farms, cacao trees are actually planted among other trees. So they'll have banana, rubber, coconut trees, and they'll plant the cacao in among them. And here you can see this is actually a family in Colombia, a mother and her sons on their farm. So the taller mother trees actually shelter the cacao trees, because cacao beans and cacao trees are very delicate trees. They have to be kind of babied and taken care of. So those taller trees actually protect it from diseases, protect it from wind, protect it from sun, and the decaying leaves are natural fertilizer. So they're really trying to go back to the roots of growing chocolate to make a more sustainable chocolate, because we need certain very particular types of places to be able to grow chocolate. You can't just grow it anywhere. And if we don't want to lose that as a commodity, we have to really stop and think about how we're growing it. Okay, so the farmers raise the cacao trees they set out the cacao seeds in these fiber baskets, or sometimes in plastic bags. It only takes a little while for those seeds to sprout, and they grow into seedlings, and then they're transplanted among the mother trees. And those seedlings only take about 5 years to get to the point where they are large, glossy red leaves. They start with red leaves, they become green-leaved plants in about 5 years, and at that point, they're ready to start producing. And you can see this woman from Africa is actually, in Indonesia, actually holding the fruit from the cacao tree. And you can see behind her the green-leafed mature plants. And you can see they're not, they can get up to 50 feet, in the wilderness, but they're usually grown at a kind of a more of a dwarf version, because it's very hard to get to those beans. Unlike fruit trees here, the cacao tree makes flowers and seeds all year long. It doesn't grow from the top down. As you can see here, the fruit actually comes right from the trunk, from the main branches, so they kind of grow all over the tree. They're very prolific, okay? A cacao tree sprouts thousands of pink or white blooms. Only 3 to 10%, so 1 in 10 or less, will actually produce one of these big fruits. But a healthy, productive tree will produce 200 pods a year, and each of the pods has 30 to 50 beans in it. So, a good healthy tree can produce a lot of cocoa bean. And like I said, it does produce fruit year-round. Now, they don't necessarily pick year-round, okay? When harvest the cacao pods ripen all over the tree, they basically harvest 2, maybe 3 times per year. And part of that is because they don't want to damage the tree. They're very delicate trees. They're shallow-rooted, okay? If you damage the blossoms when you're picking the fruit, then you aren't going to get the next fruit. They can be damaged if you try to climb them. So they have to really take good care of these. That's why they don't pick constantly. And it takes a really experienced farmer to know when those cacao pods are just right. And it's important that you pick them at just the right time. Otherwise, the whole process from there will be thrown off. And you could damage your tree, and you could damage your blossoms. So they have to be really careful when they grow these. They actually do not climb the trees. They use almost like a special hedger on a blade to actually cut the pods very carefully from the upper branches. And that's part of why they grow smaller trees, so they don't have to climb them. Now, you've got all these beans. What are you going to do with it? Well, once the pods are harvested and collected, they have to be opened. And this is, again, you have to be careful because you don't want to waste a single bean. So they often traditionally will use a machete. And this, again, still takes an experienced farmer that knows what they're doing to not injure themselves and not injure the pod. But one of these folks can open 500 of these pods every hour without damaging the beans. You can really kind of get into that groove. Once the pot is open, there's a white pulp that you can see here, and 20 to 50 actual beans. And they need to be scooped out. That pulp is actually edible too. Apparently it's kind of a sweet and lemon flavor. It doesn't last long. I don't know, I've never had it. Now I'm like on a mission, I want to find some. Anyway, the workers take all those pulpy coated beans, lay them out on banana leaves or in boxes, depending on where they are and how they're working, and they allow fermentation to begin. Fermentation is a really important chemical process that you've probably heard of before. And basically what happens is natural yeast and bacteria will break down sugar into an acid, like a vinegar. We use this process for beer, for making sauerkraut and pickles, for wine, for vinegar, for tons of different products, okay? In fact, your sourdough breads are all fermented products. Same thing here with cocoa, with chocolate. The fermentation is really necessary for the flavor of the cocoa. And so you don't want to rush it. And they take their time to ferment these beans because that chemical process is what actually starts the flavor to produce. So fermentation generates heat as well. This kills off the part of the bean that would regrow, which is desirable because you don't want the beans to, in this nice moist environment, try to make new trees. We want the bean. It also activates enzymes, and enzymes are kind of like, they get chemistry started in biological systems, okay? So those enzymes start doing their thing, and they cut down the bitterness that's normal to find in a cacao bean. They give it the chocolate flavor. They give the beans that customary brown color. Depending on the bean, certain beans, the Criollo, they only need to be fermented for like 3 days. Other beans will need 6 to 9 days of fermentation. Okay, so it's not a long process. And it typically takes place in a warm area, and that heat will really get that fermentation going. Once the beans are totally brown, they're ready to be dried. So the drying process. Typically, you could see, I love this picture because look at all those beans. Wow. So they have these big kind of grids that they'll lay them out on, bamboo mats or special trays, and they'll leave them in the sun, taking them in at night to protect them. But they're turned regularly so that they prevent any kind of mold from growing. This is a farm in Ghana growing chocolate. And this does 2 things. It dries it out, reduces the moisture, so you get more of the chocolate that we really want. And it removes the chance of mold growing, kills off the mold, which is really important. Mold and moisture go together. So you got to get things dry to get rid of that. Once that's done, and this drying also does richen the flavor too. But once that's done, they're ready to be shipped off and processed more into actual chocolate. So, now the beans are prepared. Now they're a commodity crop that can be sold all over the world for chocolate manufacturers to use. And more goes into it. So the first thing that needs to happen is these beans need to be roasted, kind of like coffee is roasted, or nuts are often roasted. Here you can see a woman in Mexico very traditionally roasting beans. But there are 2 basic ways of doing this, and it really depends on the company and what they're hoping to achieve for the flavor. Sometimes they pre-roast it, they kind of very quickly heat the air around it that causes the inside bean to separate from the shell, which is called the nib. And then it's roasted at 100 degrees to 150 degrees for about 20 to 40 minutes. And I'm just going to give a quick check to my chocolate there. The other process is to just throw them all in when they're in the shells and roast them straight up. This is an older method, okay? It's a more traditional method. It does allow a lot of flavor to develop, but it can be a little harder in the next step. For this, roasting is at 150 to 160 degrees Celsius or 300 to 320 degrees Fahrenheit for 40 to 50 minutes. So seeing this woman in this traditional way of roasting those cocoa beans, she's going to be there a while, and it's hot, okay? Obviously, in a plant, they have machines that are doing this. So the next step is called winnowing. And basically all that means is that you want to separate the shell from the meat. Okay? And the shell is your cocoa nib. That's actually the ingredient. All this work for the shell on the outside of the bean. Unusual, right? You were probably thinking it was the meat that was the big important bit. It's not. It's the nib, the roasted nib that really gives chocolate its flavor. So they crack the beans open. Traditionally, they would do this, with like rocks. Obviously, we have machines for it. Crack the beans open, and then fans blow wind over the beans and push the lighter shells away, leaving behind pure cocoa pieces called the nib. That's what we want. So we get rid of the outside shell, we leave the roasted nib, and then kind of the meat. Now, why is it's being very strange today. So now we take all those nibs that are roasted, and we grind them. And we grind them, and we grind them, and we grind them until we get what's called a chocolate liqueur. It's not alcoholic, okay? It's just called that because it's a liquid. It contains both the cocoa solid and the cocoa butter, basically equal, so it's not a thin kind of thing. It's an oily kind of liquid. But it can be pressed to push out all of the cocoa butter. And then you have what's left is the cocoa powder and the cocoa. And that, of course, is really what we're looking for. You can use that directly to make chocolate, or you can process it even further to separate more of the fat. We then move on to conching. This refines the chocolate, okay? More grinding, processing. And at this stage, manufacturers will start adding things like sugar, milk or milk powder, other ingredients for flavors. So this is kind of like the early blending where you're kind of like refining that chocolate. Every chocolate maker has their own special and often very, very protected and secretive way of conching and how long it takes. Can take a few hours, can take several days, depending on the flavors that they're hoping to achieve. And finally, we get to blending. And this is where, the magic comes in, where every single chocolate maker has a different way of blending and a different kind of flavor for blending. So your chocolate liqueur is blended with cocoa butter in different quantities to make different types of chocolate. There are 3 basic types of chocolate you're going to find. There's dark chocolate, which has sugar, cocoa butter, cocoa liqueur, and sometimes a bit of vanilla. Milk chocolate is going to have sugar, cocoa butter, less cocoa liqueur than dark chocolate, milk or milk powder to smooth it, and then vanilla. And then white chocolate is just sugar, cocoa butter, and milk powder, and a little vanilla. No actual chocolate liqueur, which is why some people do not think of it as being actual chocolate, because it's really just the cocoa butter. Now you'll also see baking chocolate, which is the cocoa butter and cocoa liqueur without any sugar. Okay, so that you can blend it yourself. You will find just flat out cocoa powder where that's dried, and you can get that that powder. Great for cakes, great for making your own hot cocoa. But if you're talking about edible chocolate, those are your 3 types. All right, whew. That was a lot, right? It really was. So why don't we talk about ways that we can use all of this knowledge to make something tasty, right? Okay, I'm going to take a quick look. Yep, it looks like we are ready. We're going to switch cameras over here and see what we have got for today. Okay, so switching cameras over here, I've got a couple things going. Oh no, it froze. 1 second. This camera used to be no problems whatsoever, and now it's like all the time it wants to give me trouble. There we go. So, what do I have happening? I have 2 things. This side I have set up on a heater, and I have basically a double boiler going. So I've got a hot plate, I've got water, and then I've got my chocolate in a little silicone container, or you could use a second pot. And I'm boiling the water and I'm melting the chocolate in a second pot. We do this because we don't want to burn the chocolate. You can burn those chocolate solids really easily, okay? And it's not going to be tasty. You can also destroy the fat. So we don't want that. You'll notice I'm using colored chocolate. It's not really chocolate. It's what we call candy melt. And it's made to be easier to melt, a little more consistent. It doesn't need tempering. Let's talk about some chemistry while this melts for me. And while I'm doing that, over on this side I have, better turn this down. I have this is a candy melter. You can get this at like a craft store, and I have let mine sit a little bit longer than I should have. So these are very convenient if you want to do candy work, because you don't really have to pay as close attention. You don't have boiling water to worry about. So I've got some white chocolate candy melts here, some colored chocolate candy melts here. So if you remember last week when we talked about sugar matrices, right? And you have like a nice organized crystalline matrix, which makes things really hard, and an amorphous matrix, which makes things a little softer. Well, chocolate has a matrix too. When you melt it all down, you kind of disorder that matrix. And if you were to mold from it just as it is, you're not going to get a nice glossy look to it. You're going to get something that looks more like, well, rubber. And that's not really very desirable. So we temper chocolate, which means we melt it down and then we add a little bit of unmelted chocolate to it. And what this does as it melts is it kind of flashes that matrix back into a little bit more of a structure, so that when you pour it out as right away, now you get a nice glossy finish. You get a little bit better mouthfeel, less grit, because you realign the matrix and that crystalline matrix within the sugar, the fats. You put them all back into their proper places in the pattern, and it tastes better and it looks better. Now, when we use candy melts, you don't have to worry about that. They're using different fats. They're not using traditional cocoa butters. They're using different flavorings. They're not real chocolate. You can, of course, do anything I'm doing here today with chocolate chips. Just remember to read the instructions on how to temper your chocolate. And make sure you know how much to add and when to add it so that you get a nice finish. Candy melts are also an option. You can find them at a lot of craft stores, and they come in all kinds of colors. You can color white chocolate, but you have to use a colorant meant for that, not a water-based colorant, a gel colorant, because otherwise it's not going to mix with the chocolate. It's very fatty. You can't mix water with this very easily. Okay, so we have a couple of different ways that we can use. I'm going to just grab that we can use our candy melts, and I'm going to make sure I don't accidentally burn myself. Okay, that's looking good. Like that. And I'm just using popsicle sticks. You can use spoons. Okay, so you can see they're nicely melted. Now, why did I melt down some little colors here? Well, let me show you what we're going to do. I'm going to move this aside for now. And I'm just going to, I'm going to actually keep it over the water. This is where it gets dicey because I'm on my own. And I don't want to get burned, right? No burning. That's no fun. But I do want to move this out of the way so I have a little more space to work safely. Okay. So here I have some silicone molds. You can get plastic molds. You can get silicone molds. There's all kinds of different types. I like the silicone molds personally. I find them a little easier to work with, but to each his own. So these are some skulls that I am particular to this time of year for fairly obvious reasons. And what you can do is if you paint, or if you make small bits of chocolate that you've melted, you can actually paint into your molds with it. So like if I come in here and just add little dabs of some black chocolate where I want eyes, and I should probably put my glasses on because I can't see what I'm doing. By the way, these paintbrushes have never been used for anything but chocolate. They get washed, okay, with dish soap before use and dried, because again, you don't want water in your chocolate. So we keep them clean there for foods only, okay? But I'm going to go ahead and just add, some details. If I was doing this with like a bunch of different colors, what I tend to do is pour some hot or boiling water into a tray, like a broiler dish or something like that, or like an aluminum tray. And I pour the water in that, and then I put my chocolates, my different colored chocolates, into like a little muffin tin. Can you see what I'm doing there? So I put my chocolates into a muffin tin. It kind of gives me like a chocolate palette. That's how I do it at home. Nice and easy to do. As you can see, I'm just going to go in there and kind of paint my colors. Now, you're going to want to let that cool completely before you move on. So that's my little paint, and then I've got a pink here. I'm going to do a little sugar skull thing because, why not? Let's see. So I'm just kind of coming in here. And you do kind of want to build it up. It's not quite like painting where you can leave it as a thin layer. you do kind of want to give it a little bit of dimension so that the chocolate that you pour on next kind of grips it and it doesn't, hide the work that you've done. And that takes a little bit of practice. I find a lot of my kids really prefer to use the clear trays for this because they can see, you can actually flip the clear tray and look to see what it looks like, and that sometimes can help. This chocolate is not melted quite right for me. So, but you get the idea of what I'm trying to do here. Kind of just creating little patterns. And I am not, experienced. I'm not a heck of a painter. My kids are better at it. You can also use a piping bag if you want to. A lot of people enjoy that, and you can just pipe right in there and make more delicate patterns. But taking the time to do this with your chocolates can be really fun. You can get some really nice designs. So I'm just going to let that cool for now. And while that's cooling, I'm going to show you a really neat technique. If you don't have molds sitting around, that's okay. This is brown sugar. The same stuff you buy in the store. And I've just poured it into a bowl. I often like to do this in a pie plate or in a dish. And you're just going to kind of push it down. Okay. You want to make a nice thick layer, really pressed together. Okay. And you take something that you want to mold. In this particular case, I have a 3D printed Yoda. He's not a great 3D printed Yoda, but he amuses me. So I'm going to take my Yoda, and I'm just going to take his face, and I'm going to press it directly into the brown sugar, carefully. Pressing, and lift it straight out. Now I've got a mold of his face in the brown sugar. And all I have to do is bring my chocolate, which has overcooked a little bit. Oh well, it'll still be tasty. And just pour it right on in. Now, you do want to be careful here. You don't want to mess up your mold because it's pretty delicate. But you just kind of press it down in there, and you give it a little tap, 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 tap. And you're just going to let that cool. I usually pop it into the fridge so that the warm chocolate doesn't melt my sugar. And when it is hardened, you just take it on out, you brush off the sugar, or if you want, you can rinse it really quickly in water. To take off any of the brown sugar. It gives it a really cool look, something totally different than you'll see anywhere else, but you can make any kind of molds of pretty much anything with this method. It takes a little bit of practice, but if you mess it up, you can use the brown sugar over and over and over again. Though once you're done with this, that brown sugar goes in the garbage, okay? We're not going to use it for making a cake or something because now you've had your hands in it. I would normally wear gloves if I was doing a lot of this, but this is just for demonstration purpose. So that's a really fun way to mold chocolates. Okay, but if I was doing my regular chocolate mold, same basic idea. Just going to take my chocolate right on into my mold. Ta-da. And, usually with these kind of molds, you don't want to go above the fill line. So I'll take a little out, in fact. Okay, like that. And then I always like to give it a tap, and then that's kind of why I like popsicle sticks, because I find it easy to kind of, and like I said, obviously, while I was chatting away, I kind of overcooked my chocolate. That's what that looks like. Now you know. But give it a little tap, and there you go. Pop that into the fridge. Once it's hardened, you've got a delicious treat. Another thing that you can try is if you have metal cookie cutters and a metal cookie sheet. Put your cookie cutter on the cookie sheet, put it in the freezer, get it nice and cold, and pour your chocolate into the cookie cutter. While it's on the sheet, hold it down, pour your chocolate in, and then put it right back into the freezer. And you can make really cool molded chocolates that way too. I just don't have a freezer here to do that. But you get the basic idea. So those are 3 fun ways to put chocolate to good use. And let me tell you, you can find these candy melts and good quality chocolate in a lot of places, at most grocery stores now. I even found this stuff at General Dollar right here in Blairstown. So you'd be amazed what you can find if you go looking. All right, coming back on over here. I think I've probably chatted at you enough today, but I do love chocolate. It's really interesting. And if you want to do yourself a favor, research the biology and the biochemistry of how chocolate works on our bodies. It's really amazing how much it interacts. There are over 300 flavonoids in chocolate liqueur, and many of them do activate our bodies in different ways. So I encourage you, you've got some time, get out some brown sugar, make some fun chocolates for Halloween tonight, and have a special spooky treat. My name is Sandy Roberts. I'm the Makerspace Coordinator for the Warren County Library System. This is Friday S.T.E.A.M, but keep in mind that we also have Maker Mondays and upcycled maker crafts at 3 p.m. on Mondays, and this week we'll be doing this fun light up sugar skull on November 2nd. Using a template, aluminum foil, and a couple of tea lights. So that's a great project. I hope to see you then. Have a great weekend. Have a wonderful Halloween. If you haven't already signed up for our virtual Halloween escape room, there are still spots left. That's going to be all day tomorrow. 13 fun challenges to work through during the course of the day, and you get a special digital trick-or-treat prize when we're all done. Okay? So check out our event calendar at warrenlib.org. Let me put that website up for you. Oh, my website has disappeared on me. Whatever. Have a great weekend. Have a spooky Halloween, and I will see you again on Monday. Take care.